Okay, good morning, good evening, good night from wherever you're watching us today. Welcome to this series of Fab Does Not Wait Global Talks. Today we will be have like a super nice panel that will be joining us related to North America or the United States, if you want to call it like that. We will have like a little round of introductions with each of our panelists, and we will then open up to a couple of questions from our moderator Tom, and then we will finalize with a couple of questions from the audience. We had a very interesting session last week with the South Asia Network, where we kind of grasped a little bit of the power of communities, power of a couple of industries that had joined the call and offer their services and their support to the community. And now we're going to go with how the United States has approached this situation related to the Fab community, the COVID response, and getting involved with a wider audience. So, Tom?
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead. My name is Tom Dubick. I'm the Fab Lab director at Charlotte Latin School. And we actually have a Fab Lab behind us. We have students in the back of the room actually working on projects, in case you see that. So right now, I'd like to go ahead and introduce and have every person tell about what lab they're at and what they're doing to help on the COVID response, or at least in a general moment here. So the first one I would like to start with is Julia.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be part of this conversation. My name is Julia Hansen, and I am part of the Fab Lab called Fab at CIC, which is operated out of the Cambridge Innovation Center in Boston, Massachusetts. And our focus in terms of sort of where we fit in the Fab Lab network is working a lot with entrepreneurs and innovators in the Boston area and helping them do prototypes of projects that they might want to bring to market, and also working with local artists and creatives of all types. For our response to COVID, our lab, which in terms of staff includes me and Leo McElroy, who's also on this call, we have been dedicating our resources to making cloth masks. And we've been using the Olsen mask design, which was created at a Fab Lab that's connected to a hospital in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. They came up with a design that includes 3 pieces that can be very easily laser cut. And so we are doing the laser cutting in our lab, and we're connecting with a large network of people at home who want to do sewing. So tapping into the sewist community in the greater Boston area. And so we create the laser cut sets of mask pieces. And then through a local organization that just sprung up in response to the pandemic called Boston Area Mask Initiative. We've been sending these sets of masks, and they are coordinating with hundreds of sewists every week and receiving requests from social service organizations, medical centers. At the moment, organizations or groups that are involved in the Black Lives Matter protests, and sort of vetting all of those requests for donated masks and then coordinating the delivery. And so what we've seen is that our Fab Lab has been able to focus on what we do best, really, which is using the digital fabrication tools to provide a means of making the sewing community more efficient. And we are less well equipped to do the sewing of these masks, but we really can help out with this sort of like input of the lasering at the beginning of the mask making process. So for us, that's been a really nice sort of matching of skills and interests in the Boston community. And I should also just mention that we've seen a really inspiring sort of surge of people wanting to do something to try to help in some way during this time. And so even outside of the Boston Area Mask Initiative, we've had other sewing groups and just individuals with a sewing machine at home reach out and say, like, how can we help? And being able to give them a way to get involved has also been really nice, a very nice way to sort of connect in the community and demonstrate like the value of having a digital fabrication lab like in the city. So I'll leave it right there. I think those are my 7 minutes, and happy to jump in on any other questions.
All right, thank you. The next person we got up is Jean-Luc.
So, and I wanted to ask, can I do screen sharing really quickly during the talk?
Sure.
Okay, all right. But Ima Jean-Luc Perit. My name is Jean-Luc Perit. I'm a member of the Tunica Biloxi tribe, originally from New Orleans. Calling in from Boston, which we recognize as the traditional indigenous territory of the Massachusetts Nation, who continue to this day as in part through the Massachusetts tribe at Ponkapaug. So I wanted to do a screen share while I go over sort of like my own sort of like personal journey during the global pandemic. Here's where things kind of started for me. So I currently work as the International Logistics and Procurement Manager for the Fab Foundation. And during the sort of like figuring out like how the network is going to respond, we started to see like all sorts of different projects come out. And of course, there was R&D done centrally at MIT Center for Bits and Atoms. But we started to sort of like curate like all of these different projects that were coming out of the network, which range from like face masks to face shields to respirators. So for myself, it was education as far as like the depth and the breadth of like how the international network was going to respond and what were sort of like the problems and local solutions that were coming up. And so while it was great to sort of like get that bird's eye view internationally of what the response was, I wanted to figure out a way in which I could implement that more locally, either like with my own tribe. I reached out to my family back home in Louisiana, asking about like, hey, you know, there's these things going on. Do you think maybe like the tribe could get involved with mask making? And you know, that was it was kind of like, well, you know, the tribal government did have sort of like resources to kind of get masks out to elders. And so that was one thing. But the most obvious way in which I could get like involved with my community is sort of like the other hat that I wear in these situations. So here locally, I am president of the board of directors at the North American Indian Center of Boston, and we do. Sorry, I see the 1 minute warning. Do I have like, okay? So I'll go really quickly. So we started doing mask making, and this was like on site because we have a partnership with a local makerspace called Boston Makers, where they rent space from us, and we have access through a memorandum of understanding. We also we did some cutting of parts through the makerspace, and we were doing sewing on site at North American Indian Center of Boston. We also worked with a local partner who focuses on Indian health services, Native American Lifelines out of West Roxbury in Massachusetts. But in terms of like getting out PPE and face masks to the community, we found the need that there was like a need to get educational material out there. So right now we're doing census outreach through getting face masks out to the community. We're also taking part in the Mass Department of Public Health COVID-19 Health Equity Advisory Group, which the Department of Public Health does not distinguish American Indian, Alaska Natives in state level reporting of COVID cases. And so we're trying to kind of have like a feedback loop in how we're doing the distribution of masks and getting the information back to the state. And then finally, we've been able to sort of like expand our services to Indigenous peoples within Massachusetts. So we've partnered with other organizations that serve Mayan families in the greater Boston area. This is Mayans Without Borders. So yeah, so we've been able to get out face masks to them as well. So yeah, so I'll just stop there, and you know, any questions, I'll take them later.
All right. Wow, a lot of great work going on in Boston. It's pretty clear. Jay, can you tell us introduce yourself and tell us what you're doing?
Hey, so I'm also coming from the Boston area. I'm in Olsen right now. I'm from Artisans Asylum, which is in Somerville, and one of our members, among other things, one of our members, his son is a nurse, and he saw that there is a huge need for medical supplies in local hospitals, and so snowballing from there, we had 2 different face shield initiatives going. We were laser cutting fabric on site for Julia over at CIC. And I found, along with another maker, that nobody was addressing the shortage of protective gowns for medical workers. And so we were able to go to a number of area hospitals and ask for samples of the gowns that they have, backtrack that pattern, and then through a whole bunch of in-depth research, figure out what materials were the best to use for that. So actually, I apologize if I'm in any way unclear. I'm currently supervising a shift of volunteers to make gowns right now. I'll stand up and show you the floor here, but we just got a grant from Get Us PPE to continue making all summer. So behind me are the rolls of fabric, and then I have some of our volunteers here in our production line, which isn't very involved, but it requires a lot of space and a lot of table space because each gown is, 2.2 yards of fabric. And we were able to get through Neil Gershenfeld and MIT Center for Bits and Atoms, we got an ultrasonic bonder that was broken, donated it, and we fixed it. And actually it just went down over the weekend and we fixed it again. That's been heat sealing the seams of our gowns to make sure that we're able to create these single-use items that have no holes in the seams. And we just got this fabric tested, so we'll actually be switching to Tyvek 12 in the next couple of weeks here, which is a more protective fabric that actually has the possibility of being able to be reused. because it'd be really great not to be throwing this much plastic into the trash for the rest of summer. And that's what I got for you.
Excellent. Again, well done. Boston is just rocking it up there. So what we'll do next is I'm going to introduce, you just talked about how a student got involved and started the program in Boston. We had a similar experience here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And Katie, can you tell us about yourself and your involvement?
I'm Katie Chai, and I'm a high school student at Charlotte Latin, which houses the Charlotte Latin Fab Lab in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm going into my senior year, and I think my role with the Fab Lab is kind of, last year I took the Fab Academy course, and then I guess this year I've been involved with the CLT Medi, which is providing face shields to the local hospitals. I think originally both my parents were doctors and they were complaining about the lack of protection during the COVID crisis. So I talked to Mr. Dubick and then we got, I guess, the nonprofit rolling.
Okay. Anna, can you talk about how we address the nonprofit and about yourself and your role in this a little bit, please?
Sure. My name is Anna Chai, and I am actually Katie's aunt. So I am a documentary filmmaker based in Brooklyn, New York. My brother Gene is a physician at Atrium here in Charlotte. And then my sister-in-law Janie is a physician at Novant Health, which is the other major medical system here. So I actually came down to Charlotte because things were getting kind of crazy in New York. This is like the end of March, and my family was nervous about me being there, and just anyway, I think they were just felt more comfortable if I was with Gene and Janie. So I came down, it's funny because I came down on March 20th, and then this was when everything started. So basically a few days before, Katie and Mr. Dubick talked, and they were trying to figure out what we could do. They determined that face shields could be made using the printers at the Fab Lab, the 3D printers at the Fab Lab at Charlotte Latin. And they thought that face shields would be a really effective form of PPE because the design they sort of settled on was durable and could be sanitized and be reused. So it would lengthen the life of any masks that they had, whether they were cloth masks or N95s, and they could be made locally. So basically, this kind of Charlotte Medi, which is short for Medical Emergency Device Innovation, kind of formed based on people in the community, the makers, academics, engineers, designers, and everyone just kind of mobilized their 3D printers. And so because I have like a project management producing background, I got involved and started a GoFundMe. And so basically, you know, we needed money to pay for materials, buy the PET-G, which is the clear plastic visor. And so basically we started that GoFundMe on Saturday, the 21st. And within a couple of weeks, we had $70,000. And then in total, we ended up raising $114,000, I think, in total. So what was cool about that is with Terrence and Tom and the whole community, we realized that the 3D printers, while awesome, and like we had a lot of access, people all over North Carolina wanted to get involved, and we shared design files and, you know, helped with tech, you know, troubleshooting. The best way to do it was to move to injection molding. And again, a lot of the people in the Charlotte Medi, like grassroots group, had industry experience. So they knew A, how to make an injection mold, B, they had relationships with people like local manufacturers. So it's not like we'd have to outsource to Chicago or overseas or whatnot. So again, we just kind of, everyone asked, and oh, I have a friend who can do this, or I know someone who can do this. And so within a month, within actually like 6 weeks, we made over 100,000 face shields. And we're doing other work on other devices based on the request from other hospitals in Charlotte and North Carolina.
Excellent, excellent. Next person up is Dr. Fagan, who was my instructor in Fab Academy back in 2016. And when Katie called me, we decided that we would start getting feedback from the doctor stuff that we'd make face shields. Real quickly, I reached out to Dr. Fagan because not only could he prototype, I knew his background in manufacturing, and he works at the university. So Dr. Fagan, can you take it over?
Thanks, Tom. My name is Terrence Fagan. And I want to first of all thank you for having us here. I really appreciate it to tell us a story. It's been quite a journey, but more about me. My day job is I'm an associate teaching professor at UNCC in mechanical engineering. I'm a Fab Lab graduate of 2014. I started Fab Ed Carolinas in Central Piedmont Community College in Charlotte, North Carolina. Since then, I've moved to UNCC. I currently advise Charlotte Latin Fab Lab and also UNCC Fab Spaces. That's University of North Carolina at Charlotte. And I'm a Fab Lab guru. My working background, I've been working with industry basically since I have a mechanical engineering degree. I've worked all over the place from Caterpillar, lived in Japan and things like that, working in industry, mostly manufacturing and design. So with that, with Charlotte Medi, and it was perfectly right in the sense that we got and mobilized all of the community as a group. Tom reached out to me and I was very excited about how can I help. And it was kind of serendipitous because a couple days before I was telling my wife that I wanted to help out more. I just didn't know how to. Tom reached out and he told us about this. We met with a group of doctors and the community members. It was a small group. I think there was only about 10 or 12 of us over an online meeting using something like this. And we quickly figured out that face shields would be the best optimal choice to go forth and to springboard what we've done. What we've done is we started making the face shields and we quickly recognized almost in that meeting that there was so much of a demand here in Charlotte and North and South Carolina. We wanted to stay local. That was our main thing. Not that we wouldn't help anyone else, but we wanted the local materials, kind of using the Barcelona kind of framework on producing local, but sharing the information. So we quickly reached out to industry for developing these shields. Meantime, we've met and we produced about 100 or so of these face shields. And then we got them quickly in the hands of doctors. I think that quick feedback loop, because we knew we were eventually going to mass produce these, but we didn't know what. We can't take something that's designed for a 3D printer and then basically injection molding. So basically what we did was we got feedback, what worked, what didn't. We had a couple more meetings and this lasted almost probably 3 or 4 days of that quick turnaround. And then from there, we were able to redesign. We took a group of small engineers and designers from the community between UNC Charlotte, Charlotte Latin, Makerspace, and some other things around here, other entrepreneurs. We met, small group was probably about 5 of us, and we redesigned this in about an hour or 2 to be injection molded. We had 2 companies, Texelon and Carol Poly, on board with helping us. They are local. They're within 10 miles from Charlotte. And they were able to help out and redesign a couple of these shields to be mass produced. So then we went on to ramping for mass production. We were able to, in I think the first week, we were able to produce 5,000, and next week we were able to produce more and more. And we were wondering when it was going to stop. That was the major thing. It's like, when are we going to stop this? But in that, we distributed to the local hospitals. We set up distribution routes. We quickly realized that other people were contacting us throughout different areas in North Carolina. We helped set up people in New Jersey and New York that wanted our designs. All our designs that we made were open source. The final design was based more on a Prusa design, but we were able to modify those designs. They still are on our website, charlottemedi.org. And then from there, we were able to help out, I think, somewhere in Colorado, Ohio. I worked with New Jersey, Jersey City Makers, and they were able to produce more and they're still producing a lot more for the New York greater area. With that said, we're looking, as Anna pointed out, we're looking at a couple more, and we want to help out the local hospitals. That's what the Charlotte Medi was about in the beginning. So with that, I thank you for your time. Thank you for letting us tell your story. And Tom, I'll take it back to you. Appreciate the opportunity.
And just to add to what Terrence is saying, we also have the injection mold files available. I know the pressure files are out there and we modify them a little bit, but the injection molding can save you a few days and get people manufactured. We produced over 100, delivered more than 110,000 face shields that way. Question I have for everybody, I'm not sure I could have gotten involved without the training and things, but could people talk about maker spaces, particularly Fab Labs, and if they've got Fab Academy experience, talk about how this impacted their ability to be able to contribute? Because I do think back in March and April, everybody wanted to help. We were fortunate to be enough to be in a position to be able to help. So does somebody want to speak to that, please? Jean-Luc or Julia, someone from the Boston area want to talk about that?
Sure, I can jump in, and I think that again, kind of like it's Fab Academy, it's the Fab Lab Network, it's my job at the Fab Foundation, it's the guidance of instructors like Dr. Fagan, Terrence, who was the first person to put up with me during my attempt at Fab Academy. But I think the overall, like our kind of overall mission as a community is that, you know, okay, you have access to all of this technology. First, what are your local problems? And then what are the solutions that you're gonna come up with? And then by extension of that, not only is it prototyping of hardware, but then when we go into sort of like social interventions, like the Fab City project, and kind of like, you know, ballooning out to even sort of like the message of like what the book, Designing Reality, talking about how social systems are being tested because they are not evolving at the rate of technology right now. So we're seeing that, like, you know, with COVID, we're seeing that with the structural changes that community members are demanding. And that's why, you know, I kind of like go back to those issues of like how American Indian, Alaska Native data is being collected in public health agencies, and or whether or not we are, you know, we need that data, and we need the data from the census in order to show impacts of these challenges to our communities. And so, you know, we're doing like the production of face masks. Yes, we're like leveraging like our access to the technology, but the overall project is, you know, okay, now that we're empowered, now how do we like take this ability and like transfer those competencies over to like structural change? And that's the real impact of like all of this.
Okay, Julia, do you want to add something to that?
Sure. Well, our lab has not hosted Fab Academy in the last couple of years, but I think the way that we sort of decided what we should focus on had a lot to do with the initial conversations that around like late March and early April between makerspaces in our area. So in conversations with folks at Artisans Asylum, at Boston Makers, Brookline Makery, several other places that were all, you know, as makerspaces or Fab Labs were looking to get involved, but weren't quite sure what would be the most effective way. And so, whereas I think the sort of the institutional links between those makerspaces weren't really present in the Boston area at the start of the pandemic, through discussing how to respond to COVID, that you know, brought us a lot closer together. And I think for the immediate purpose of making PPE, it allowed more clarity of information amongst all of those places to understand like what were their relative strengths. For example, the Fab Lab where I work is a relatively small space, Whereas Artisans Asylum is huge. Has tons of like machines, space to like spread out and do production, and so we, you know, in thinking about like how we can step into the needs of the you know, of the medical community in Boston, and you know, people who are otherwise on the front lines, like doing social work, you decided that as a maker space, but with you know, a good lasering capacity, we would be most effective in cloth mask design. But you know, we were able to make that decision, like knowing that folks at Artisans Asylum were creating gowns, creating face shields, and sort of like working on other aspects of the problem. So, and you know, and sort of like bringing that back to what Jean-Luc was saying with like the Fab City framework of local production, and Fab Labs sort of existing as one of the core pieces of infrastructure, and how sort of like as a society, or as like human organizations, we need to sort of like adapt at the rate that technology is developing. Just going back to the notion of like makerspaces working together sort of in concert to decide like what needs to be produced where by whom at any given moment, I think is a interesting experience, and hopefully like a learning for going forward.
So what it sounds like you're all saying, the importance of community with the Fab Lab, that Fab Lab needs to be reaching out to the public at large. Does that seem reasonable? You know, Jay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to add, like, you know, all of the work, like that we're not at NACOB, North American Indian Center, Boston. The work that we're doing is not in isolation. It's thanks to the local network. You know, it's thanks to Fab at CIC. It's thanks to the Boston Area Mask Initiative and the South End Technology Center, and their partners as well. So like that ability to sort of like identify and leverage the local network, you know, has helped us like meet the needs of our community, and you know, that's a very powerful tool in this time.
Excellent.
One thing I just wanted to add is, like, in terms of the community, I mean, I'm not a Fab Lab graduate or affiliated, so it's been really interesting to see a lot of these practices sort of take hold. But I mean, at least for Charlotte, there were volunteers from the Charlotte Latin School, where there were parents. Once we had a website, and we mostly put up the website so people could request PPE. We were working with hospitals to sort of assess their need, because that was an easy way to distribute a lot. And mind you, most of these were donated, because again, we had these funds that were from the GoFundMe. But random people, you know, were just like, hey, you know, I want to help. I can't sit at home. You know, companies donated boxes, a company donated warehouse space. We were really kind of surprised, pleasantly so, by the generosity and the active involvement from the community. So, I mean, it's amazing that you guys linked together within Boston and Cambridge, within the different makers. But I think in terms of structural change, that was really eye-opening, because I think it's both in times of pandemic, you know, people want to do anything they can to be helpful, because just sitting at home is so depressing, or, you know, makes you feel powerless. And so whether it's firing up the 3D printer, you know, running boxes from one house to another, we cut elastic, so we'd get them in these 1,000-yard rolls, and we would divvy it out, and whole households would spend 2 and 3 hours cutting 14 inches pieces of elastic. And they were so eager to do like simple manual labor, because it was helping, again, their own community. And so, you know, I think that's something you should recognize, it in terms of whether it's a Fab City concept or just this willingness to help. I feel like I haven't seen anything like that in a long time. And so, like, since then, with, you know, everything else that's happening politically, and, you know, in terms of all around, at least the US, I hope this is something that will, you know, people are getting more active, even just registering to vote or, staying late, like at their polling places. So I do feel like in a weird way, we've taken, what's the expression that never miss an opportunity for what is it?
Don't ever miss an opportunity. The crisis presents an opportunity. Whenever there's a crisis, there's an opportunity.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to shift it because we're going to look at big and then small, the role of how do you take ideas where you have makers and fabbers making things, and then how do you produce them at scale, which I think if maybe we can have some tips for other people looking in on this. And then Katie, as you're thinking, I'm going to come back and saying how young people can involve and what everybody else experienced were young people that can get involved in these things. So I'm going to start off with Terrence here, but I'd like others to jump in too. How does a makerspace or a Fab Lab go about involving industry? So when you really want to scale up, because we got to the point where we were making several hundred face shields and 3D printers, but at one point we could make several thousand face shields a day, injection molding. Go ahead, Terrence.
Well, thanks, Tom. And I'm going to echo what most people are saying. It's about the community. And one little thing before we discuss about how we want to scale or how to scale things, which is vastly important to reach multiple people. But it does. I get. I don't know the word. When we talk about maker spaces and Fab Labs, most people are like, "Oh, that's just engineering," and I'm like, "No, not at all. It takes a community. It's not just engineering." At UNC Charlotte, we have machines, multi-million-dollar machine labs, down to 3D printers that are $100 and anything in between. So, using the universities, we have probably 6 or 7, 5 labs like Fab Labs. They're not Fab Labs per se, but we had computer scientists jump on board. We had librarians jump on board. We had engineering, not just all types. We had the artists, and in large part, the largest lab that we have more towards the maker community is in architecture. And those guys there were fantastic. So we had all these professors and all these students helping out. So basically, how do we organize that? We had meetings every week it started out almost every day, and then we had weekly meetings. Now, how do we get something from the maker community to scale up and to be mass produced? On a roundabout, we have to find ways we have to think about ways to manufacture quickly. Now, most of the solutions are out there. For instance, we had, luckily in Charlotte, we've had a textile industry that actually went down basically in the 90s and early 2000s. But some of the machine shops are still around. I know in New York, same thing. So we were lucky to have these kind of industry folks in Charlotte. So I can reach out to them. I knew them. Some of them I didn't know. Some of them were connections on industry that were willing to help out. For instance, the face shield, it consisted of 3 parts. Two of the parts could be plastic injection molding. And again, one company couldn't do it as fast as we wanted. So we actually had three companies running at once. We didn't just have one. One could produce something because they were over capacity. They were actually running other things. They were for that. We wanted to stay local. We were lucky. Again, we were lucky to have something of luck. But if you want to build it, we got to build the industry locally and then move on. We had the visor, which is the transparent part, and basically we were laser cutting them at UNC Charlotte. We were laser cutting them at a place called Charlotte Makerspace. We were also laser cutting them at Charlotte Latin. We recognized that was our next bottleneck. So basically, we were putting out fires every day, figuring out how we can do that. So luckily, again, we had industry in Charlotte that we could do die casting, and also, so we did a couple runs with a couple different companies to ramp up production on that side. We needed to get the multiple industries involved, not just the plastic injection molding. We had to use small to medium-sized shops. Small meaning maybe a handful of 20 engineers and manufacturing guys. The largest shop we used for the visor, we ended up a combination of using laser cut, but also milling. And I think their company is over 500 or so. So that's actually a large company. So basically that's what we did. We needed to get from one place to another, and we needed industry involved, and we needed just someone to go out and start asking and start pounding the pavement. If that helps, Tom, if you want me to go into any more detail.
Well, I think you did a pretty good job covering that, especially with the time constraints we have. What I wanted to go back now is shifted. So that's industry, that's professionals, but how on the other side, Katie, how do you see how students are getting involved with this? What your experience is? What does the Fab do? What do you think going forward? Where should we be going as a community to serve students who then can pay this forward?
I think my big takeaway from this is the amount of reach that someone could have, even if they aren't like very important. I know I was really surprised with how big the project has grown and how many masks we were able to make. 100,000 masks is a lot, I think. But then I also was excited to see, like everyone's been saying, with how the community's been involved. I know my friends have been driving around Mass to different drop-off areas, and then my teachers have been asking how to get involved, which is really exciting. And then even I went to the dentist the other day, and then they were using the face shields, which is really exciting as well. But I think with my role with the Fab Lab and my experience with Fab Academy, it really opened a bridge for me to connect my dad and Mr. Dubick to I guess help the greater community. I think individually they both weren't able to I guess create this product, but together they've been able to help so many people, and it's exciting to see the medical community and then the Fab Lab community, or I guess engineering, come together and make this product.
What else can the Fab Lab community do to reach out to more young people? And then I'd like to hear others what they think about that. What would you say?
I think just having these opportunities like the Fab Lab or Fab Academy is really good for the younger community. I know I started taking engineering in 7th grade at Charlotte Latin, which is exceptional. I think that's not an opportunity that most people can have, especially since it's expensive and it's kind of a luxury. But I think just at my school we have Girls Who Code, who teaches children how to code from I guess a middle school, which is something that's a good way for people to reach out.
Does anybody else have suggestions of how we can get young people involved and then also serve communities that aren't getting served?
So what we've been trying to do in Boston, I'm running 3 shifts of volunteers, 6 days a week, in order to keep pushing these gowns. You don't want to know how many hours I've spent making gowns over the last 3 months, but we have a midday shift that is 2 to 5 p.m. that I'm having a really hard time staffing. And so we've been trying to reach out to teen centers and YMCAs and other community programs that I can get teens either volunteering, or we received a grant that we can have a few paid employees that allow folks to really see that you can go from having this idea on paper and cutting out one gown at a time with a rotary cutter to having a fabric saw and running a production line where we've now made more than 10,000 pieces.
Okay.
And so just trying to find those groups that we can reach out to help all ages come in and volunteer on this line and see where their ideas can go.
is there a way we can make sure Jay's email, do you have like contact information if someone sees this, they would like to reach out to your Fab Lab, or do you want to just shout out to your lab again so people know,
Tell
hey,
you what, let me get out of the private chat. And if you email us at volunteers.a2@gmail.com, we are looking for volunteers every day, pretty much, except Mondays, because I would really, so personally, I'm a trained pastry chef. I usually feel really out of sorts in our makerspace, actually, because I can't do the things that I'm trained to do there. But it's been really cool to repurpose my sewing skills to run the ultrasonic bonder, or to see how other woodshop skills have come into play to use our fabric saw. And I realize I'm gesturing here to a bunch of things that y'all can't see. But then being able to introduce folks younger and younger to these sorts of tools and how they can use those sets to do something as simple as design all of their tables to have wheels so that we can minimize the number of touches on an item, so that it goes more smoothly to a production line.
Hey, Tom, and everyone, hi, I'm Pamela King. I'm with the Southern Technology Center. Hey, Terrence, John-Luc, Julia, Norella, all of you that I've met, that I know. I'm retired from the Fab Foundation, so, but I wanted, you know, I get these notes about these meetings. Anyways, to talk about how young people are getting involved, the Southern Technology Center has, in their Fab Lab, in their program, we have been working for the last 18 years with high school students. It's called Learn 2, the number 2, teach number 2, learn. And where we hire high school students and we train them, you know, so they go through like a mini Fab Academy and learning all of the tools. And then they go out to the local community summer camps and do that kind of training, teaching them robotics or coding or coming up with all kinds of activities. And for Jay, I would suggest that the city of Somerville, they helped to build, we helped with the help of the Fab Foundation, Fabville at Somerville High School.
I am in fact familiar. They're a great program.
Right, and so since you're talking about getting young people, or how young people can become more actively involved with your program or at Artisans Asylum, you might want to reach out. I can't remember his name, but I know that they moved to a middle school because they were renovating the high school. So that could be an option for you to, you know, get them, because I'm sure they would love to be doing something if they're not doing something already. You know, I don't know all, but, you know, we've been also doing some stuff with another local organization and making PPE, and, you know, and initially Julia did set up a local group, try to pull everybody together here in the Boston area to, you know, see how we can be, you know, do a Fab City kind of production of the PPE, and hopefully, you know, so we're still working on it. I know, Julia, it's a work in progress, and okay, so, you know, you got Jean-Luc there, and, you know, you can call on me too, to see how we can, you know, merge some of these others, but, you know, so thank you.
well done, Pamela, and thanks for 18 years of doing this. That's fantastic. That's touched a lot of lives, I'm sure.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Good. Leo, do you have anything you want to add to this? So as a young person, and what you would say, how can we get the word out, and, you know, getting more young people and working on COVID, but also getting involved with Fab Labs and the Fab community?
That's directed at me.
That would be directed towards you. I've got you on the spot.
Okay. I mean, I think the tactics of partnering with schools is a good idea, especially because a lot of them are trying to come up with new programming that can be done maybe out of school in many cases. Yeah, otherwise, I'm not sure I have something totally unique to offer to the conversation.
All right, that's fine. What do we think
Can
going?
I just jump in?
Absolutely, Julia.
I think Leo was put on the spot, but he does have a lot of experience in starting a makerspace at a university, which is how he originally got involved in makerspaces. But maybe Leo could share a bit about that process. I know, sorry, Leo, again on the spot, and maybe you haven't had coffee yet this morning, but
there we go.
But I know you have a lot of experience in sharing how to get something started as a student, as part of a school or university.
Yeah, I mean, it required a lot of persistence, and I ended up getting to know the broader. I went to Middlebury College, which is where I started that makerspace. But getting it started also involved reaching out to the community quite a lot. And I mean, I think in general, one of the things I liked about makerspaces, and one of the things that ultimately was necessary about getting it started, was bringing together, really focusing it as a community center rather than targeting it towards a specific discipline, was emphasizing that it was this shared facility. And I was actually very intentional about not putting it under the government, under the bureaucratic structures of a specific department or something. But I think it's always a very difficult thing when you're running this sort of space, where it's if you don't identify with a specific thing, then what does your identity actually become? And I think the key point was just being intentional about actually going to meet different people that were working in different sectors, working in the local town, working in the administration, and physically bringing them to the space and running programs with them.
All right, thank you.
And Tom, I wanted to add. I know that we were talking about young people, but I also wanted to talk about communities that are kind of underrepresented in the network. And so I kind of have those two perspectives of Fab Foundation and North American Indian Center of Boston. Fab Foundation being kind of somewhat central to the Fab Lab network, and then North American Indian Center of Boston being a social service organization. Yes, we're kind of tied into South End Technology Center through our Timothy Smith Network Computer Lab and that network. And we also run workforce development funded by the Department of Labor for Native Americans in Boston. But it's sort of that the image that I've been given by Dr. Ron English is that it's a roots and water approach. So you have somebody from the social services side or the community side that really knows kind of the value of access to technology and what the problems are. And then, the Fab Lab network is just kind of reaching out. And so eventually, it's maybe not gel together all the way, smoothly as much as possible, but it definitely you can definitely guide that process in. So it's just meeting each other where our interests intersect.
Well, that's a great way to look at it. We only have a few minutes, I think it's about 10 before we get to general questions. But one last thing I want to live with is just going forward. What do you see as what we should be doing going forward and some of the challenges? So if anybody wants to address that. As we continue, the pandemic's not going away. The numbers are disturbing here in the Carolinas. And we have a lot of communities it's becoming clear that we're way underserved. What do you think going forward we need to be doing, folks, and what are our challenges? Does anybody want to step up to that? All right, Anna.
This is more of a question, but it's something that we struggled with, which is how do you determine need? In terms of we were working with Blue Cross Blue Shield because they were serving some of the more rural areas. We actually ended up applying for a grant because there was an organization that was specifically looking for underserved areas and wanted you to identify counties that you could help. But that was constantly a question for us, which is how do you know if the supply chain for like N95s is being, is been replenished, or what areas even within Charlotte, like what neighborhoods don't have masks at their local Target or supermarket or drugstore? I don't know if you guys had any better help in terms of determining like who gets gowns or who needs masks, and so I just thought I would offer that to the group.
Yeah, and I wanted to.
Sorry, go ahead, John.
Okay. Oh, thanks. Yeah, just really quickly, I wanted to just kind of like go back to like the data issue that we have, and American Indians not being distinguished by Department of Public Health here in Massachusetts. But that's sort of like a national, international sort of like issue about like what the true impacts of this pandemic are on Indigenous communities. Of course, we know there's housing security issues, there's digital divide issues, there's also disproportionate impacts. And so, in this unsure time where we have like phased reopening and the second waves, we know that we're in this for the long haul. And so it's just kind of like a touch and go, because we're living day to day. And it is hard for like, doing production at scale. But it's also motivating for individual community members.
Gotcha. Jay, you were going to say something?
In terms of how we figure out who's getting PPE, we had a relatively difficult time in the beginning because we don't produce fast enough to get to some of our bigger area hospitals, but we were outstripping the need of some of the smaller community organizations. And so receiving this grant from Get Me PPE or Get Us PPE has been really helpful in that they actually take care of the distribution of the gowns that we're producing up to, I think it's 22 or 25,000 pieces, which hopefully will complete in the next month or so. But it's been really nice to take that burden of decision off of us for now, because it'll give us time to do a little bit more research in terms of folks either in the medical market or the tertiary market of like dentist office, child care workers, things like that, folks who might need protection but aren't traditionally who we think of for isolation gown users.
Gotcha. Excellent. Well, Norella, do you think it's time to go for questions now?
Yeah, I think it's fine, unless you have another question to ask the panelists. No. Okay, so I think we have a couple of questions coming from our YouTube viewers. We have one from Tomas Diaz, and he's asking, could this manufacturing capacity shown in COVID-19 be extended over time and other sectors need it? I don't know who wants to answer that question.
Terrence?
Yeah, I think, Thomas, I think yes, in a short run, the answer would be yes. We were lucky in a sense that we had the funds already, so I was able to pay and fund the mass production of these shields. If we didn't have that, that would have been a totally different conversations. So it was in the foresight of Anna and the Chais to actually do that. In the long run, absolutely. It can be, and it's not. A Fab Lab, makerspaces, and also industry can definitely collaborate in the long run. We are doing it now with other means here in Charlotte. We are connecting mass manufacturing facilities with our Fab Lab weekly. So it is in the long term. How we do that, we're figuring that out on the fly, basically. But there is it's another set of skills, not just the technology and making things. It's the social skills. It's connecting the dots. It's really needing a couple of people or a team to figure out how to use industry for the betterment of people. So I hope that answers your question, Thomas.
Julia, you were going to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that it's really important to think about how small businesses can play a role, and thinking about how the transition from folks who are volunteering at the moment, transitioning from volunteers who have the capacity to get burnt out, or who may have very good reasons that they need to spend their time going back to their jobs, and how we can maybe work with businesses that traditionally haven't been part of Fab Lab networks, or makerspaces in the past. One thing that we haven't done, but we're looking into doing, is working with small businesses that do tailoring in Boston, and bringing them into our Fab Lab to do some of the laser cutting that they can immediately put into making masks that they can sell, but ideally also use that as an opportunity to demonstrate the power of digital fabrication tools, even in businesses that use other types of tools that are more either traditional or analog, and sort of use the opportunity of making PPE to bridge the gap between sort of digital technology and like other businesses that don't use that very, very often at the moment. Unfortunately, I have to step out at this moment, but if any other questions come up around Fab at CIC, Leo is here to answer them. And also we have one of our most active sewers and organizers of the sewing community in Boston, which is Beth. And so she is also able to answer any questions for the next half hour about the mask making initiative.
Thank you, Julia.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye, Julia.
Great
Yeah, I don't know if anyone else wanted to join or answer that question, because we have two more questions from Tomas from YouTube.
Does anybody else want to add anything, or do we want to go to another question? Let's go to the next question.
Okay, so the next.
Go ahead. There's questions in the chat as well.
For sure, but we're going in order.
Oh, okay. I just didn't. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. You got it all figured out.
Don't worry. Yeah, so the next question is, how much collaboration is happening between makers, fabbers, and the industry? How do you see that collaboration going along?
In Charlotte, if I understand it correctly, it's going almost, I'm in contacting industry almost daily with certain issues of new things that we're trying to do. For instance, we're on a project that requires kind of to ramp up from using 3D printers to using mold and casting before it gets injection molding as we ramp up this. So I'm contact. We have people now in smaller industries that we're lucky to have in Charlotte again. Look at molding and casting for us, and before we go into industry, and cast these more complex projects. That's ongoing. We actually, with our Fab Lab, we were asked by a company outside of North Carolina to actually help us mass produce some other stuff. So we were able to connect with them using Fab Lab technology and people in our Fab Lab. So it is happening, and it's happening more and more, because I think industry now, supply chains or supply chain people that how they used to do it has to change. And what I mean by that is if I'm a supply chain manager, I would say my doctors need XYZ, they pick it out of a catalog and then they order it. That can't happen too much now, especially at this time of the pandemic. So with that, instead of looking at a catalog, they need more choices. and they need more, not just the actual product, but the functions of the product, so it can move to either using a Fab Lab, depending on how much we have to make, and then move on to industry if that's the case. So it is happening, and we're doing more and more of that on a weekly basis using our Fab Lab. I hope that answers your question.
Also, can I just say this from a Fab Lab at a school perspective? Sometimes there's a question, and I've talked to other schools, they're going to have a Fab Lab, but an important role of a Fab Lab is to get community at large involved in your Fab Lab. And so our Fab Lab is very involved. We're an actual node, so we do training here, and we're the only one that really specializes in high school, a group of high school students every year and throughout the whole Fab Foundation. But what we have started doing is having what I just jokingly call adult swim, like at the pool, when you chase all the little kids out so the adults can get in the water and cool off. So on a given night, we'll bring out people that want to get involved with the community. And I do think it's super important. It's not just engineers or programmers or somebody wants to make a robot. It's the artisans. It's showing people the creative side. And then that builds your community so you can go out and reach when there's a crisis. But it also brings more skills. It gets your kids fired up because they see people coming in here. Now, Jay, did you say you were a pastry chef?
I did.
Well, guess what, Jay? Because we could have used you a few days ago, because behind me, the kids from Fab Academy for machine making made a cupcake making machine.
That's fantastic.
So they poured that out. So like I say, you never know when these skills are. We could have certainly used you. So to answer that question, I think it's important, again, and it's not always obvious, but to reach out in that community at large. Got another question for us, Norel?
Yeah, he was just bombarding with the questions. Yeah, another from Tomas. And what about circular economy principles in the life cycle of production and materials? Like, what's your approach? How have you tried to attack that aspect as well?
The circular economy, well, again, we're lucky here in Charlotte to have, and I think it's called Envision Charlotte. They actually recycle the plastics, PETG, which we used on our visors, our polypropylene, which we've used on our shields. Their job is to they have machines that actually take the recycled material and chop them up to be reused. And we're not, that is something that they're doing here in Charlotte to be reused. And actually, what's actually really cool, and thank you for bringing this up, Tomas, this is awesome. We connected one of our manufacturers in industry with this company because they were running out of polypropylene. So they actually got stuff from Envision Charlotte to Texelon, which is one of the companies we used as product for that to make. And I don't know if I'm supposed to tell you this, but they're making product for shields for some larger corporation. I'll just leave it at that. So yeah, that's how we're kind of producing with that. It's not so much Fab Lab, but it is happening in Charlotte, and it is connecting all of those loops from circular economy.
What about you, Jay? Can we jump Jay in there, or did Anna have something to say?
Anna wanted to say something, yeah.
Oh, I just wanted to say that I thought, the engineers were, Tom, I think, has a background in materials, and I know that Hardik, one of our engineers, also mentioned that the polypropylene that we used for the face shield could also be melted down and reused. So we have to figure out the sanitation issue before we can recycle them, but I thought it was really cool that basically no part of the face shield that we made has to end up in the ocean, or it even has to end up in a landfill. And I know that for the other products that we've been thinking about, that's something they've been mindful of. So it's awesome that, for example, the gowns are going to be made by something that doesn't have to just be thrown away. I think that's an element moving forward which we have to be conscious of, because plastic in the ocean and climate change was a concern before COVID, and now COVID's kind of trumped everything, but those problems still exist. So I feel like that mindfulness with the design process, especially when we move from design to manufacturing on a mass scale, is really critical.
I'd just like to actually say we're hoping to be able to switch from these single-use gowns to a multi-use gown, but right now we have our fabric comes in these 6-foot wide strips, but we're only using 60 inches. So we're actually creating a ton of this polypropylene fabric waste, and we've really struggled to find someone that will accept it. I understand that it can be shredded and used as fiber fill, but nobody in the North, there's not really a lot of room for industry like that in the Northeast, and so we haven't been able to find anybody who's willing to take our scrap. And so that's something that we're struggling with a lot, because I don't want to just throw this in the ocean. One of the things that we tried to do initially was cut patterns into surgical caps and send those over to Julia and the CIC folks to get them sewn. But again, because they're single use, that sewing ended up being more time than it was worth.
May I ask how thick that was? How thick your PDG is? How thick is it?
This is fabric. It's 30 grams per square meter or 45 grams per square meter.
Okay. All right.
Jay, if you want to send me an email, I can put you in contact with Charlotte, Envision Charlotte, a company. It's a nonprofit, and they wanted to, their goal is to recycle plastic where it can be recycled. So if they cannot do it, they may have some connections that may help you. I don't know, possibly not, but possibly. So if you want to send me an email, I'll be glad to help out.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
In terms of the community aspect of modeling a circular economy, just to kind of like bring everybody back a couple of months now, at that point we were all uncertain about global supply chain and how we were actually going to feed ourselves, how we were going to kind of like clothe ourselves and meet our basic needs. And so what we saw locally here in the greater Boston area was sort of the rise of mutual aid networks. And that kind of, from that sort of idea, and I've seen this sort of like nationally, there has been sort of like indigenous mutual aid networks that, in terms of like, of course, like providing the face mask and everything, but then also like providing traditional medicine, not necessarily as prescriptions for treating like COVID-19, but like, keep your immune system up. This is good for respiratory problems. So, we're seeing sort of like that influx as well coming from our community. So it's, materials wise, there's also sort of like the lack of demand for sort of secondhand clothes going to like Salvation Army or Goodwill or thrift stores like that. But then, we have people that have, excess fabric. And so, as long as it's clean, as long as it's something that, we could perhaps like reuse, why just go ahead and put it into the material supply chain, do no harm, but, of course, we have the community to rely upon each other and, build, sustainable future.
Wonderful.
Okay, anyone else wants to join into that answer? Or can we move on with the next question? We have a question from Beth, actually. And she's wondering how people are documenting and sharing stories from all the individuals involved in this pandemic help-a-thon. So yeah, I think that's a big one.
I know that we started a Instagram and a Twitter, and actually posted photos and news stories that covered our project on the website. So that was kind of an important element because actually a lot of the various healthcare workers or whomever received the face shields wanted to show gratitude. So they would take pictures of their stuff on shift and share it with us that way. So we started posting it originally like the GoFundMe, like as updates. So like, which gets sent to everyone who donated. And then we like have it living on the Instagram. So most of it has just been photos that have been shared with us more so than an active documentation campaign. But yeah, the photos we want to share them as much as possible just because to the volunteers who, we had something like 700 volunteers like affiliated with Charlotte Latin and in the community who were helping out. Like they work so hard. We joked if we were a for-profit company, we wouldn't have been able to pay for all the labor that we got. And so it was just a small element of like letting people know that your work made a difference and that you had a positive impact on the people like in your own area.
Hi, I just want to say, as far as documenting and putting it out there, I just put a couple of links to what the Southern Technology Center has been involved with for the last couple of months. They have partnered with this Liberation Socialist organization, and they're actually the ones that have been distributing the masks. They have a couple of volunteers that come over to the center along with a couple of people, volunteers at the center to use the sewing machines that we have there. But they decided to distribute them to what is called the essential non-essential workers, the ones that generally go into they're the building cleaners and, you know what I mean. So, and then just anybody. And one way that we've been, so we do have it documented, because one of the local news televisions did a feature on that. So back in April. So I put a link in the group chat. So if people want to see, so that's one way to answer that question. Yes, it is being documented. And we still need to document, going further, and also how we can, pull everybody together because everybody has been working in different ways, and like Charlotte, you all have your community is a lot smaller than Boston, and so we have a lot more hospitals here. We have a lot more in other institutions here. So yes, and as John Luke said, we have had a large community come together on various areas, but when it comes to coming together, to make these masks or other, devices or things, I didn't know that us Artisans Asylum was doing the scrubs or the protective clothing. And, that might have been something I would have been interested in, but I didn't know. So we do need to do a better job here to reach out, and see who's doing what. And, and then if we could have some kind of central space, I mean, more than just the GitHub or whatever that is, but we need something that everybody can access, easily. Thank you.
So Pam, I've been following South End Technology through Twitter. I understand there's a lot going on there. But what made me think about the documentation, and I picked up material from Leo and Julia at Fab at CIC, I noticed this great building, growing, leftover fabric structure happening all in a pile. And Julia was saying that they have to come up with an idea of how to create something out of that. So that would be a wonderful story, a visual story of what happened during this. But I think there's also many secret stories out there. And as I was dropping fabric off to a teenager, she's a junior high school, I never met her, but I ran into her mother who took the material from me. And I said, so how did T learn how to sew? And she said, oh, she didn't know how to sew. We didn't have a sewing machine. She borrowed a machine from a friend, and then she FaceTimed with her grandmother, who sat down with her.
Nice.
So chills that, and this is what's happening out there, and it would just be nice to get these little vignettes or these little together somehow.
Right. And that's why I think, having like a little news site or website, some kind of way to, where you can share that kind of story, and, anyone can share, and they're out there, I know. And, and again, here in Boston, there are so many different groups making masks, and it's not just through Fab Labs or maker spaces. And there are, dry cleaners that are doing that, and, selling them. And we have many people who are taking those that have been made and distributing them to people. So, but we just don't really, I mean, I hear about it, because I'm on certain networks, but, as far as this particular network, like I said, that's why I said, let me join, come in, and, because I wanted to hear, to see how I can then, spread the word, and to throughout my community here as well, but, and still connect to people like Beth, Leo, and John Luke, and everyone else out there, so I can tell about Charlotte too.
Yeah, we have a. Do you want to speak something, Tom?
Yeah. Well, actually, I wanted to kind of direct the question to somebody else, but Anna, you mentioned that you're a documentary filmmaker.
Yes, I am, which is ironic that I haven't been documenting this process.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, is it something that has occurred to you?
Yeah, it's funny, at the time, I think in the moment we were trying to work so quickly. Honestly, it was just, we knew that like there were days left of PPE in a hospital. So it's like, slowing down that process didn't seem possible. And also there are things happening in multiple places at every time. So I think once sort of the urgency not died down, but just subsided, and once we had systems in place, yeah, I don't know why it didn't occur to me to film more of the process. I think it was just, at the time, it didn't seem like there were enough hours in the day to do anything else but just getting this production line up and running. But yeah, I guess it was just, I mean, now that it's sustainable, like, I mean, that's an interesting thing now, is like, is it worth doing now? Because it's, the need is not over, if anything, it's sort of morphing. And so that, in North Carolina, the work that we did at the end of March and beginning of April actually, I think, slowed things down. It did flatten the curve, which is unfortunate now that the cases and the deaths are spiking, because it's like, because they had protection, because the hospitals were prepared, and because people stayed at home, it didn't spread as much as it has. And now, I don't know. I mean, just to tie into one of the things in the chat, they were talking about this idea of herd immunity and what do we do to stop that? I mean, I do think that communication is maybe the effective thing here. I joke that, I think someone had mentioned that, like, personal responsibility is like what's kicking in now. There was this community effort to create PPE that can help the front line, which started as the health workers. And now it's like, okay, the health workers have enough, or their supply chains are being more normalized. So who's the next person in need? What's the next stopgap? It's like these essential frontline workers who people are, the grocery stores and the cleaners and all those services, now our priorities like shifting down to them, or our attention shifting down to them. And so we can get them protective gear, but I think the bigger message is all these people who are going out, not wearing masks, like, socializing like it was no big deal. So I feel like maybe that's where I can come into place now, or other people like me, and like the news, which is that these numbers are rising, and it's based on behaviors like this. One thing I read this morning in the news is that at least in North Carolina, like New York and New Jersey and Connecticut have just basically said people who come from these number of states now have to be in quarantine for 14 days. And so, I mean, that seems fairly reasonable considering what's going on. But so how are people going to curb their behavior? You know, maybe that's a little bit of shame, and also just showing that, like, oh, this is what they were saying. They were saying that the cases were actually not, they were linked to Memorial Day, which is when the restrictions eased up. And they were actually saying how the cases where there have been, like, the cities where there have been protests have actually not had the spikes that they expected. So whether that was a media thing in terms of like, oh, people who are going to protest for racial equality, those are where the COVID cases are spiking, that's actually not true. And the people who are going to protest are actually wearing masks and distributing masks to other people. So again, more of this information, like whether it's documenting or sharing it or communicating it, I think needs to come through now as another layer of how we move forward and sort of educate and protect our communities.
Can I also add to this? Can I also just real quick add to this? I think a lot of people that are helping in the maker community and Fab Labs, there was a lot of media attention on it, and we kept, and I think this was a theme across a lot of places. We wanted to make sure we were always doing it for the right reason. It wasn't to be on TV. It wasn't to be give a news interview. We wanted to make a difference, and the real heroes were them. So I'm not as sure what is going on here. Am I mine or who's
It's
in?
muted. Yeah, I muted. Don't worry.
Right. So I think part of that, and you're right, there was obviously a great time to document, but I also think there was a sense that we wanted to make sure we were always doing this for the right reasons.
Yeah, and do you want to add something super quick?
30 seconds. So community service organization to community. Obviously, we need a resilient communication strategy, and that was one of the things that we picked up from South End Technology Center and Party for Socialism and Liberation, putting the educational materials and the resources into the distribution packaging. And so that was one thing, because we're not sure right now in the United States about the future of the post office. We're not sure about how the internet is going to evolve or how our cell phone communication is going to happen. So we definitely need a resilient communication strategy. And then the importance of documenting, at least from the NACOP side, we also participate in a 40 organization wide National Urban Indian Family Coalition. So it's good to kind of have like our strategies and how we leverage the technology in Boston, so that we can spread those strategies throughout the national network of urban Indian centers.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jean-Luc. Yeah, we're basically running out of time, but I would like to close up with your final thoughts, maybe some tips, guidelines, suggestions on how to get the conversation going after this call, and what do you recommend for future makerspaces or labs that see this live version of this session?
Well, I would like to add that, going forward, yes, I think we do need to, I'm impressed with what Charlotte Latin has done, and, the Charlotte community, and I think we can learn from what they have gone through. I know it hasn't all been sweet, because you're dealing with multiple entities, just like we are in every other place. So I think, we still need to keep the lines of communication. I think one of the areas that is of concern for me, at least with the South End Technology Center, and, and maybe other small labs, even like CIC, is funding. Because above and beyond doing this projects for this particular issue, we still have to stay around for everything else. We want to be able to teach people how to use the technology. We want to be able to, so we have to, so that's where we're at, it's like survival, and how do we survive anyway, okay, above and beyond, because we've had to basically close, but so we can't even really, we haven't been able, we've gotten some funding for, based on COVID, to at least pay for sanitizing so that we can reopen, but we're only going to be able to reopen at a smaller capacity. Our summer high school program is a much smaller program. It's going to be a much smaller program. We have to spend money to reconfigure the space in order to, abide by the mandates, so that's an issue for us right now, and it might be for others, but I just know that, keep staying alive is really, the main part. But thank you again, everyone. I appreciate listening to everybody.
Thank you, Pamela. Tom, final thoughts?
My thoughts is going to come from an educator. I just think this shows from what everybody's doing here that education is such an important role in all of this. And just specifically on high school students, that they're capable and want to help in big ways. So don't forget that junior, that senior in high school can start doing adult work and can contribute.
Thank you so much for bringing us all together today.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
thank you guys. Thank you for doing that in a row.
Thank you all for joining, and hope you can join us on our next session that will be next Thursday, I think same hour, for the Europe version of the Fab Does Not Wait Global Talks. And thank you so much to all panelists for joining. Thank you so much for people asking questions through our chat and through YouTube. I think it went super nice today, and see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.